So my name is Rachel Test, and I'll be doing a presentation on the shark data today. And the title of my presentation is What's Next? An Analysis of Shark Landing Data and Its Implications for Future Health of Marine Communities. So before we get into it, I wanted to go over some key terms that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation. A lot of them are ecological, so just to give you a heads up. So on the right here, we have a trophic pyramid. Trophic levels are each individual bar on this. So a primary producer is its own trophic level, apex predator is its own trophic level. Trophic cascade is how we refer to what happens when you remove the top predator out of an ecosystem. And there is kind of just collapse tiered throughout the pyramid as the mesopredators might increase in population, overconsume the primary consumers, and just causing ecological disruption system-wide. Top-down regulation is that process of the apex predators regulating those trophic levels below it. And a top predator, also known as an apex predator, is just a species at the highest point in its food web. And the mesopredator, which some of us may be less familiar with, is like an intermediate predator. So it's not the apex predator, it's not at the top, but it's also not a primary consumer. So why are we talking about this? Sharks are typically top predators or mesopredators within their ecological communities, those terms we just talked about. And in past systems, the removal or significant decrease of populations of those top predators have resulted in trophic cascades, which is another term we just talked about. And I wanted to talk about some systems where this has happened and has been really well observed and is having conservation measures taken to prevent that. So some examples are Isle Royale National Park, that's in Michigan, looking at the relationship between wolves and moose. We have Yellowstone National Park, looking at the relationship between wolves and elk. And in both of these systems, wolves were removed from the system, and the moose and elk populations respectively increased to pretty dangerous levels, to the point where they started having negative impacts on the environment around them. The Aleutian Islands is the third one. This is looking at sea otters and sea urchins. And in this system, sea otters were the top predator historically, feasting on sea urchins and then kelp, as we can see in this figure on the bottom right. And due to conditions outside of that specific community, orcas actually became the new top predator as they were forced to look for more food sources. They didn't historically eat sea otters, but as they had to move into these communities and eat the, as they had to move into these communities and eat the sea otters, that affected the populations of the sea urchins, which rose now that the sea otters weren't there to eat them, which there, after that, destroyed the kelp forests that those ecosystems depended on. So there appears to be some degree of decline in the shark landing reports, which is why we're talking about this. And the question that I'm really interested in getting at is this decline significant enough to potentially trigger trophic cascades amongst our marine ecosystems? Because it is a lot easier to take preventative measures than it is to take restorative measures, especially when matters that come to this. So for the methods, the data that I used in this study was collected by FWC as a secondary source, so I did not collect it myself, and it was specifically from the food and bait section. The data ranges from 1984 to 2020, is only collected in the state of Florida, and in order to analyze it, I performed a regression analysis and a one-way ANOVA test to determine degree of decline and the significance of my results. And what were my results? So we can see from this graph that as the time goes by, abundance of sharks does seem to decrease from 1990 to 2020. And as a result of the one-way ANOVA test, I have been able to determine there is a significant decline at the 0.05 alpha level. Well, what does this mean? So as we talked about before, understanding systems like Isle Royale, the Aleutian Islands, Yellowstone National Park is crucial when we think about systems like these, where we're starting to see a decline in the apex predators. And from this data specifically, and from this study, a definitive statement can't be made on whether there is a decline in shark abundance or shark populations wild, because this is about shark landings. And there's a lot of other things to consider, like changes in legislation, whether social views on consumption of sharks, harvesting regulations. These are all things that need to be taken into account and looked at more specifically to determine whether this trend is just in shark landings or if this trend is in shark populations as a whole. So yeah, further research is definitely needed to determine that. And regardless, if we are seeing trends, if we are seeing declining trends in shark populations, trophic cascades should immediately be considered because, as I said before, preventative measures are a lot more effective in stopping these trophic cascades than restorative measures, because once those environments are thrown out of balance, it's a lot harder to get them back into balance than it is to keep them from falling out of balance. And that's my study. Thank you very much.